Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I was really fascinated with mythical creatures when I was a kid. It was probably because my aunt would let me stay up late with her and watch creature features on TV. It gave me bad dreams, but I still loved it. I hadn't thought about that stuff in a long time as an adult. But a few months ago, I was between jobs and I took this position as a security guard. All I really have to do is be physically present on the property for a certain number of hours and keep an eye out for intruders and respond to any alarms. It's a low-key job. But there's a building across the street from where I work that always gave me the weirdest feeling. It's completely unmarked, and at the time I hadn't really been able to find any solid information on it. And one night something happened that just sent my mind reeling right back to the creature features days. I was just doing my rounds when I saw something detach itself from the shadows near that strange building. It wasn't really my job to look into any strange things happening, but I was curious. The night felt different, a bit spooky, and with all the rumors of weird stuff happening, I felt like a detective. I pointed the flashlight towards where the rustling sound was coming from. Suddenly, next to the building, a tall, towering figure fully stepped into the light. It was like something straight out of a scary movie. My heart began to race, and my eyes must have been as wide as saucers. I was looking at a creature that was taller than a basketball player. Its face was long like a wolf's or a dog's. The creature's body was huge and strong, like a bodybuilder's but covered in dark, thick hair. Its eyes were the strangest part. They were almost glowing, a beautiful amber color that seemed to pierce the darkness. The way it looked at me was chilling. It wasn't like a wild animal stare. It had a human-like intelligence in its eyes. It didn't feel like I was looking at just another creature. It felt like I was looking at something that was thinking and understanding, just like a human. As I tried to make sense of this creature, I began to notice other details. Its chest heaved with each breath, muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. The hair, although coarse and wild, seemed meticulously cared for. The distinct musky scent of wet fur mixed with earth filled the air, overwhelming my senses. The creature's paws were another bizarre sight. They looked almost like hands, human-like but with elongated fingers ending in sharp claws that glinted ominously in the faint light. I could see the power hidden in those claws, the potential to wreak havoc, yet they hung harmlessly by its side. Then there was a shift in its stance, a tiny lowering of its head and a narrowing of its eyes. Fear gripped me then more than before because it was a look I had seen many times, but in humans. It was a look of contemplation, of making decisions. The realization that this was no mere animal sent a fresh wave of terror over me. Yet it did nothing. It merely watched me, its amber eyes now less threatening and more curious. It tilted its head slightly, almost as if it was studying me. The moment was surreal, like time had frozen, with me and this creature under a spotlight created by my trembling flashlight. I was terrified, but I still couldn't stop watching it. It felt like I was standing there forever, but within minutes it suddenly propelled itself into a run that was incredibly fast and effortless for how big it was. It went around the corner of the building and disappeared. I was left standing there, realizing I had witnessed something that shattered the boundaries of everything I had believed to be true. Since the night of that encounter, I have been obsessed with finding out anything I can about these creatures. I have this insatiable need to know what kind of cabal is invested in concealing information about them. I don't think it's right that this information should be suppressed. If you examine the features of dogmen, it seems clear that they can't just be the result of natural evolution. Their unique characteristics set them apart from any other known species. With a canine-looking head, oddly shaped rear legs and an upper body that looks like a primate. They defy classification. No animal has such a bizarre combination of traits. It's like a wolf or dog has been spliced together with a man-like primate. Some people think that dogmen could have come from ancient matings between wolves and apes, but that seems inconceivable to me. The genetic differences between those two families are too huge. The only explanation that makes sense to me is that dogmen are the product of genetic engineering. But stories of dogmen go back to the 18th century in North America, and they go even farther back in some other cultures. And as far as we've been told, genetic engineering is a pretty recent achievement. I wouldn't even be asking these questions if I hadn't seen that creature with my own eyes. There are just too many impossibilities. I think if dogmen exist, that an extraterrestrial intelligence must have been involved in their creation. Their existence seems to point to beings more advanced than humans, experimenting with life on Earth. It really makes me wonder what other biological projects they might have going on. In the UFO community, there's a pretty widespread belief that there's a hidden military and scientific establishment within the United States. And the speculation is that they are controlling all evidence related to extraterrestrial intelligence. So these things are probably vastly underreported. That's why people who talk about it are still considered crazy. A cabal that controls the military can hunt down any cryptids that venture too close to human civilization. But I think things might finally be starting to shift. There are too many of us who are privately investigating now. And I've even joined a group that's formally organized to investigate any leads we get. I'm still working at the same place, and there are more and more things adding up that indicate something is going on in that building. I don't know if that dogman escaped from there or what. The fact that my job is so low-key gives me a chance to spend a decent amount of time observing things going on over there. It's weird watching people go in and out of that building. It's usually really early in the morning or right around dusk. I can't really go into much detail right now. That's why I haven't mentioned the location, but if the time comes when there is more clarity, I definitely want to keep you in the loop. I think your channel is providing a real service for people to find each other and start cataloging a lot of information that just used to seem so random. Seeing that dogman really woke me up and reminded me that there are a lot of forces at play that need to be brought out of the darkness. This story brings us a strange and unexplainable disappearance from Pennsylvania in the 1800s. The Allegheny National Forest is incredibly vast. It spans a large part of the north-central portion of the state of Pennsylvania. It is just as wild and mysterious as the Appalachian Forest, but lesser known. The area also witnesses many people going missing every year. One of the strangest cases is that of Edward Jewett. The case is still unsolved from over 160 years ago. Edward disappeared from his home in Whitehead Hill in Warren County. He was a man in his 70s, described as frail and small. He was a very friendly and sweet old man, adorned with a gray beard and a brush of shaggy gray hair that stuck out beneath his small cap. Like all men of the time, he wore leather boots with his trousers tucked in to keep his trousers clean. He was the type of person that practically had no enemies because he was so well received by his peers. He lived with his wife in a small log cabin just a short distance from his son, Enoch. He spent a lot of time visiting with nearby neighbors and socializing, so he was pretty well known in his community. Edward also had a dog named Jerry that was practically his shadow. It was common for Edward to go on daily walks with Jerry following him everywhere. The day of his disappearance was not any different. It was a day in early spring and it was later in the afternoon. Edward had stepped outside, with his wife later claiming he never put on his coat, nor did Jerry follow him outside. It's not likely that Edward had just wandered off by himself, since at the time, he needed assistance walking with a cane. His family and friends couldn't believe that he would have made it more than a mile. After some time had passed, an unknown amount of time, a search had finally begun for Edward. In the mountain range surrounding his tiny cabin, it was a rather large group consisting of 90 men divided into groups of 10. The forest around his log cabin home was searched. checking every nook and cranny, hollow tree, and crevice. Fortunately, there were no open wells, creeks, or mines that would give Edward the possibility of falling into and hurting himself. One thing that's very strange is that at this time, there was still snow on the ground, but virtually no trace of Edward's tracks could be found anywhere. Indeed, if he had wandered off in the woods, they would surely find his tracks. There is suspicion that there was a conflict between Enoch and his father, but it's all hearsay. Is it possible he was grabbed, murdered, and disposed of? Or like many of the others who just vanished without a trace? Did he somehow wander off where nobody would find him? Of course, there are many theories floating around, that he was abducted by aliens or taken by monsters of the forest. But unfortunately, it was so long ago that we'll never know. It seems as though he had just stepped off the face of the earth, disappearing into eternity. There are no answers as to whatever truly happened to Edward Jewett in Pennsylvania. If there's one thing I don't like to talk about openly, it's my run-in with a Sasquatch. Locally, I've become known as a bit of an alarmist fool because of the tale, but I swear to you, and on everything I hold dear, that every word of this is true. In the wooded valleys surrounding Paducah, Kentucky, I came upon one of the creatures 3 winters ago while I was out hunting a runaway hog. I never did find the hog, but I followed an awful foul odor for a good mile back into the sticks, thinking I'd find a rotting hog corpse eventually. The snow wasn't real deep. It had been a mild winter so far, and while the ground was frozen underneath me, the only snow we had was a light dusting that had fallen just that morning, so I didn't have any tracks to go off of. I just smelled the god-awful stench from far off and decided to try to follow my nose, as it was my only hope in the moment. As I got further into the sticks, I couldn't help but feel like there was something else out there with me though. A couple times I felt like I could hear twigs breaking somewhere back behind me. Then, when I turned around to look, I wouldn't see anything. This went on for a good half hour or more. Finally, I stopped turning around. I would just call out behind me, "Who's there?" as I stood still waiting to see if anyone or anything would respond. The deeper into the sticks I got, it seemed like the worse the smell got too. This gave me the sense that I was getting closer to whatever was laid out there rotting, and I felt sure I'd know what happened to my lost hog soon enough. About the 3rd or 4th time, I stopped and called out, "Who's there?" I heard something respond. It was a low grunt, almost hog-like itself. This caused me to spin around fast and wonder, was the hog still alive? Was that what had been following me out there in the woods? I let out a hog call, and I waited, and I heard nothing. I remembered I had a couple cookies in my pocket. I always carried Oreos out with me to check on the horses in the morning to offer them as treats, and I hadn't given all of them away that morning. I pulled an Oreo from my pocket, hoping the hog would want one as badly as the horses always did. "I have a treat for you," I yelled out. Still, nothing. I was getting pretty frustrated with this whole ordeal and feeling a little foolish. I thought about all the other things out in the woods that grunt and ultimately decided I was probably trying to lure in a deer with an Oreo cookie. The smell had now grown unbearable, but there was still no sign of anything rotting anywhere. I decided I was done with my search and I was going to call it a day. I was froze to the bone, and that hog, if it wasn't dead, was too far gone by now to track. I'd just have to wait at home and hope she showed back up on her own time. I got up and started the long walk back to the house. As I did, though, that feeling of being watched grew even stronger. Now I could sense something right behind me and even thought I might be hearing the long, drawn-out breath of a large animal or a person. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I said out loud, "Whatever you want from me, just tell me." Of course, it didn't say a thing. Slowly, I turned around. This time, it didn't run and hide. About 5 yards back behind me, standing at least 10 feet tall, there was a large hairy mass. It was human in body form and stature, but much bigger all around. It had deep-set dark eyes and a muzzle with large wide-set nostrils set above a large protruding mouth. Its ears were large but sat flat against the side of its head like a human, and it was naked but covered in scraggly long hair. I reckon that's how it had managed to hide so easily among the brush. Now again, this might be something I should be ashamed of, but I'm not. Anyone would have done the same in that situation. I felt a warmth run down my leg as I started wetting myself, staring at it. I know it must have noticed too, what with my jeans darkening and the steam rising up. It got a look on its face that seemed almost like pity as it backed up a few steps. I started walking backwards, carefully stepping. I lifted my hands up and stretched my arms out to the side for balance, and also to show the thing I wasn't trying to be a threat to it of any kind. I had nothing in my hands. I didn't want to fight. As I stepped away, it dawned on me that the smell was getting less and less the further from it I got. It seemed as if the source of the smell was the Sasquatch itself, and it had been getting worse and worse as the Sasquatch got closer to me, while stalking me back in those woods. Now I don't know what he wanted, and I guess I never will. Maybe he was intending to harm me. Maybe he was just curious about what I was and what I was doing out there. Maybe he too was in pursuit of my hog. The only thing I do know for sure is I won't ever venture back in those woods alone again. And the next time I smell something rotting off in the distance, I'm going to turn the other way and not look back. I usually don't tell this story unless I'm drinking. Some people need a little liquid courage to talk to a stranger on the other side of the bar. Me, I need it to talk. It's hard for me to open up. You understand, don't you? It's hard for me to be vulnerable, especially when it reveals that I've encountered something weird or unexplainable. I don't mind putting back a few drinks, but that doesn't mean I want to be the crazy person at the bar, you know. We've all got that friend or that uncle who starts telling stories while the rest of the party swaps awkward stares. I don't want to be that guy, but I have a story, and sometimes it demands to be told. Sometimes I think I saw her, just so I could talk about it. I was working in waste management at the time, specifically in the region's forestry subdivision. Our job was to go out after forestry operations or firefighting measures to clean up the byproduct of those activities. Building a forest makes a mess, as does putting one out when it's burning. It was good work. It made me feel good anyway. I also felt like I was doing my part to protect the environment. I was doing what I could, and that's what mattered. In this specific incident, we were responding after a wildfire had been extinguished. The fire teams involved had used a local river as a natural line of defense, and we were going to remove the waste that they left behind. That meant a few long days in the ash and mud and wading through the shallow river to restore a bit of balance to the forest. One morning, though, as we plunged through the fog and approached the riverside, we learned that we weren't alone. There was a woman there idling beside the river. The dark water was lapping her bare ankles. Her feet were fully submerged. She was wearing a long white dress. From where I stood, I could see that the mud had stained the hem along the bottom. Her hair was in disarray, untamed and hiding her face from us. Not that she looked our way, of course. She was facing the water. She was staring at the current strangely, as if it might deliver whatever she was looking for. We called out. We thought she might have been someone caught in the fire. There was enough ash on her tan skin to make that believable, but she didn't respond to our words. When we tried to get closer, something stopped us. Each pace we took in her direction felt like another step toward the edge of a cliff. My body screamed at me to stop moving. I did. So did everyone else on the scene. That's when we noticed she wasn't moving at all. Her shoulders weren't rising or falling. Her hair wasn't blowing a wind. Where the cold river water kissed her legs, there were no signs of shivers of goose flesh. We told ourselves that meant she was in shock. That validated our theories and made us truly believe that we'd found a survivor. We called for paramedics. They were more than 20 minutes away. 20 minutes we now would have to stand and stare at this woman. I couldn't wait that long. You understand, right? When someone's in trouble, somebody has to act. Everyone has a so-called time clock inside of them that starts ticking down during a crisis. When that clock hits 0, you move. My clock hit 0 first. I moved forward, ignored the stones of anxiety piling up in my guts, and reached for the shoulder of the frozen woman. I thought I saw my friends opening their mouths. I expected to hear them warn me away, but I didn't hear anything in that moment. I felt the raspy threads of her dress on my fingertips. I felt the hard, cold skin underneath. She felt like marble in my hands. She didn't feel real at all. She certainly didn't feel like the fragile body I was expecting. Then she started to turn. Her neck shifted erratically, one short click at a time. She looked my way. I was staring at a curtain of hair at first, dark and thick and curled like snakes. But I saw the shimmer of wet eyes underneath. I thought she was under there, separated from the real world by just this sheet of dark wisps. I thought I'd brush her hair aside and she'd come back to life. Her skin would be soft and warm again. I dragged my knuckles against her wiry locks and laid my eyes on her face. She'd been crying long enough to scar the tissue on her cheeks. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her lips were puffy and cracked. She might have been pretty at one time. That day, she truly looked as if she'd walked through the fire, or maybe stood in the river while the flames raged around her. The other people on site say I screamed after that. They say I fell frantically into the river and thrashed around as if I'd suddenly become epileptic. They rushed to help me and eventually dragged me out. And then the woman was gone. I remember coming to on the side of that river and looking for her, but it was like she was never there. Any footprints she might have left were trampled by my colleagues. I couldn't be upset with them, of course. They'd moved in to save my life. Who knows what would have happened if I'd stayed in that river, kicking and jerking as though I was being attacked. I could have drowned. I don't even want to think what would have happened if I were alone. Unfortunately, that's where the story ends. I don't know the meaning or the purpose or the message you're supposed to walk away from this with. I only know that sometimes stories like mine just beg to be told, and sometimes it's not any deeper than that. I'm Greg, a seasoned hiker and avid birdwatcher. I've experienced my fair share of bizarre wildlife encounters, but my experience on the Appalachian Trail last fall was unparalleled. I was there for migration season, and it's quite a spectacle on the Appalachian Trail. This is one point where a variety of birds like the distinctive orange and black Blackburnian warbler make their long journey from North American breeding grounds to their winter home in South America. I only lived about 300 miles away and was up for the trip. The opportunity for close encounters with these birds drew me to the trail that day. I arrived at my designated home base and got out of the car right away to head onto the trail. I was itching to get out there and I figured I could set up my sleeping quarters later. As I ventured deep into the trail, my senses were finely tuned, my eyes searching for a glimpse of the tiny Blackburnian warbler. The forest around me was bursting with life. Every inhale brought in a pleasant aroma, the familiar scent of the forest, the damp, earthy smell mingling with the musky fragrance of decomposing foliage. Suddenly, this serene mix of sights, sounds, and smells was disrupted. A heavy, nauseating odor hit me. It was completely overpowering the earthy forest scents that I was accustomed to. It was the stench of decay, pungent and repulsive, hanging heavily in the air. It wasn't merely the smell of an animal's remains left by a predator. Those were fairly common in the forest and had a certain natural odor to them. This was different. It was much stronger and more nauseating. This odor was pervasive. It wasn't just the strength of the smell that was alarming. It was its ominous undercurrent that unsettled me. It hinted at something out of the ordinary, something unnatural. Each step I took felt like a descent into the unknown as the smell grew stronger, gnawing at my senses. It was as if I was being led by this odor towards an unseen danger. This wasn't just a smell. It was a sign. an invisible sign warning me that I was nearing something that didn't belong. I knew that something potentially dangerous lurked nearby. Suddenly, there it was, emerging from the thick foliage, a monstrous entity that stood at least 9 feet tall, a hulking silhouette that appeared all the more ominous against the backdrop of the towering trees. It boasted a strange mix of characteristics with spindly deer-like legs supporting an upright form that was reminiscent of a human's posture. It was an eerie fusion of human and animal that didn't seem to completely belong in either realm. Its body was a chilling sight, like a grotesque sculptural rendition of a walking cadaver. It was as if it was barely covered by a layer of rotting skin stretched taut over a stark skeletal structure. The skin itself was peeling off in places, revealing the bare bones beneath. Every movement it made caused its skin to ripple and tear further, creating a horrific sight. The creature's face was the most unsettling part. It bore an uncanny resemblance to a deer skull, complete with a snout and sharp, bony ridges where one would expect to find a brow. But its eyes were set deep into their hollow sockets and 2 orbs glowed with an intense, almost phosphorescent, yellow light. When I first spotted it, the creature was eerily still. But soon, it was clear it had noticed me, those glowing eyes fixed on me, sizing me up. Despite its deer-like legs, its movements were rigid and calculated, not the graceful strides associated with such animals. Its unsettling blend of animalistic and deliberate behavior made the encounter more chilling. My first instinct was to flee, but I was momentarily paralyzed, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. But survival instinct prevailed, and I slowly moved away from the creature and then broke out into a full run. Once I was well out of sight, the rest of my hike was a blur. As soon as I reached cell service, I contacted the local park ranger's office. Their reaction was a blend of skepticism and concern, promising to investigate. I never did hear back from them, but I made it a point to check back in to see what they had found. I called the office, but no one answered and I had to leave a message. I never thought I would hear back, but a few days later they informed me they had found nothing unusual. That seemed suspicious to me. Right then and there, I decided to start my own investigation to figure out what I saw, albeit my research would be done online. It didn't take me long to realize that the creature's description matched that of the Wendigo, a mythical creature known to inhabit part of America and Canada. Despite the lack of tangible evidence at the scene, I cannot dismiss what I experienced. The memory of the encounter, the smell of decay, the fear, and fascination, they remain as vivid as ever. As it stands now, I am planning a trip back.